Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to chapter 36 of The Lost Years of Merlin. That is called The Last Treasure. In the last chapter, Shim and Emrys found Rhea in the dungeon and then were attacked by one of the guards. So that is where we're at, and we will start reading. Okay. "Look out!" cried Rhea. I threw up my staff, deflecting the blow with its gnarled top. As chips of wood flew, I pulled out my dagger. At the same time, the soldier drew back his sword. He prepared to make another thrust. Screeching, talons gouging, Treble flew straight into his face. One talon slashed his cheek. Without even a cry of pain, he swatted at the attacking bird. I seized the moment to bury my dagger deep in the soldier's chest, just below the breastplate. I stepped back, expecting to see him fall. Treble flitted back to his customary perch on my shoulder. Astonishingly, the soldier merely stood there, his emotionless gaze fixed on the hilt of the dagger. Dropping his sword, which clattered on the stone floor, he grasped the dagger with both hands. With a sharp tug, he pulled it from his body and cast it aside. Not so much as a single drop of blood trickled from the wound. Before he could retrieve his sword, Rhea grabbed me by the arm. "Flee!" she cried. "He's a Ghoulian! He can't die!" We dashed through the dungeon's entrance and ran up the stairs. Not far behind, the deathless soldier bounded after us. Rhea led the way, trailing torn vines from her leggings, followed closely by me and Shim. Up the spiraling staircase we raced, nearly tripping over the stone steps in our frenzy. Past the next landing, with its sputtering torch, and the next, and the next. The stairwell grew narrower as we climbed higher. Rhea, her legs as strong as ever, pulled farther ahead of me, while Shim fell farther behind. Panting, I glanced over my shoulder. The Ghoulian had drawn within a few steps of him. Seeing Shim's danger, Treble took off, his wings slapping the side of my neck. His angry screech echoed in the stairwell as he flew again into the face of our pursuer. The Ghoulian fell back a few steps, trying to fight off the bird. As they battled, so did their shadows on the dimly lit stone walls. I hesitated. Should I follow Rhea or go back to assist Treble? I heard a scream from up the stairwell. "Rhea!" I practically flew up the stairs, taking them two at a time. The stairwell curled tighter and tighter, narrowing almost to a point. Breathing hard, I rounded a bend and arrived at a landing much larger and better lit than the lower ones. At once I stopped. Before me spread an enormous hall, its walls lined with flaming torches and glittering objects, its ceiling vaulted higher overhead. But my attention was fixed on the center of the hall. Rhea had been captured by a warrior goblin. His tongue flitting around his gray-green lips, the goblin had pinned her arms behind her back. His burly hand covered her mouth so that she could not cry out again. "Welcome to our castle," thundered a powerful voice. I swung around to see a large man, his face as stern as chiseled stone, seated upon a red throne that shimmered eerily. His mouth seemed etched in a permanent frown. Grim though he was, he looked dankly handsome as well, or darkly handsome as well. Beneath the gold circlet he wore on his brow, his black eyes glared intensely. Over his face and body wavered some strange shadows, although I could not tell what caused them. Gathered around Stangmar's throne stood 5 or 6 Ghoulians, their faces as hollow as corpses. 2 Finkyran men stood among them, their coal-black hair brushing against the shoulders of their red robes. One of the men stood tall and thin, like a great insect, while the other was built like the stump of a thick tree. Recalling that Cairpri had told me, I scanned closely the faces of the 2 men, wondering if one of them might actually be my own father. Yet as much as I had once longed to find my father, I now dreaded the prospect, for I could only despise a man who would serve a king as wicked as Stangmar. "I just want to know him," I had said to Bronwyn at our last conversation. "It is better that you do not," she had replied. Alas, if he had fallen to the same state as the group before me, I now understood why. Rhea, seeing me, struggled ferociously to free herself. The warrior goblin merely wheezed in laughter and held her more tightly. "We suspected you would come here eventually," declared Stangmar with his fixed frown, "especially with your friend here to bait the trap." I started, wondering why he should care where I was. Then I realized that Stangmar still believed that I wore the Galator, the last treasure he had long been seeking. How I could take advantage of that mistake, I was not certain, but I was resolved to try. Rhea struggled again to break loose, to no avail. As she twisted in her leafy clothing, I caught the barest whiff of the freshness of the forest we had left behind. I stepped closer, planting my staff on the stones to help keep my balance on the slowly spinning floor. "Let her go. She has not done anything to harm you." The king's eyes burned as the shadows danced over his features. "She would if she could, as would you." At this time, both of the Finkyran men nodded in agreement, while the Goulians and Unisian laid their hands on the hilts of their swords. The taller man glanced at me, his face tight with worry. He leaned toward the king and started to say something, but Stangmar waved him silent. Just then, the Goulian from the dungeon marched up the stairs behind me. Although his face had been savagely scratched, he showed no sign of bleeding. In one of his hands he held Trouble by the talons, so the upside-down bird could only flap his wings and whistle angrily. "Another friend, is it?" Stangmar's shadowy face turned to a pair of Goulians. "Go see if there are any more." Instantly, the two soldiers rushed past me and descended the stairwell. I then remembered that I had lost track of Shim. I could only hope that my small companion had found a secure place to hide. Frantically, I turned from Rhea, smothered in the arms of the warrior goblin, to Trouble, dangling helplessly in the grip of the Goulian. "Set them free!" I shouted to the king. "Set them free, or you will regret it!" Stangmar's frown deepened. "We are not accustomed to taking orders from a mere boy, especially when that boy also threatens our royal person." Despite the continuous wobbling of the revolving castle, I stood as tall and steady as I could. Then Stangmar leaned forward in his throne. For an instant, the shadows departed from his face. With his square jaw and intense eyes, he looked even more handsome, while no less rigid than before. "Nevertheless, your valor impresses us. For that reason, we shall be merciful." Suddenly, the shadows reappeared, moving frantically across his face, his chest, and the gold circlet on his brow. "We know what you are doing," he growled, though it was not clear to whom. Regally, he waved to the goblin holding Rhea. "Set her free, we command you, but watch her closely." The warrior goblin grimaced, but obeyed. Roughly, he shoved Rhea onto the stone floor in front of the throne. Trouble, still hanging upside down, screeched wrathfully at the goblin, but he could do no more. "What about the hawk?" I demanded. Stangmar leaned back in his throne. "The hawk remains where he is. We trust him as little as we trust you. Moreover, keeping him as he is will encourage you to cooperate." My spine stiffened. "I will never cooperate with you." "Nor will I," declared Rhea, shaking her brown curls. Trouble screeched again, making his own position clear. For the first time, Stangmar's frown eased slightly. "Oh, you shall cooperate. In fact, you already have. You brought us something we have long desired. You have brought us the last treasure." I winced, but said nothing. Shadows flickering over his face, Stangmar spread his arms to indicate the objects displayed on the walls. "Here in this hall we have collected many articles of legendary power. Hanging on the wall above our royal throne is Deeper Cut, the sword with two edges, the black one that can slice into the soul, and the white one that can heal any wound. Over there is the famous flowering harp. That silver horn is the caller of dreams. Beside it, you can see the plow that tills its own field. No more will these treasures or any others pose any risk to our sovereignty." His face hardened as he pointed to an iron cauldron set by the opposite wall. "We even have the cauldron of death." At the mention of this object, the two men in red robes traded knowing glances. The taller one shook his head somberly. "Yet the one treasure we have most wanted is the one not hanging from our walls." Stangmar's voice boomed inside the hall, drowning out even the steady rumble of the spinning castle. "It is the one you have brought us." I knew that he would soon discover that I did not have the Galator. Emboldened by the certainty of death, I squared my shoulders. "I would never bring you anything that could help you." The grim king observed me for a moment. "You think not?" "I know not. I once carried the Galator, but it is no longer with me. It lies beyond your grasp." Stangmar, his face shadowed. eyed me coldly. It is not the Galator we seek. I blinked. You said you were seeking the last treasure. We are indeed, but the last treasure is no mere item of jewelry. The king clasped the arms of his throne. The last treasure is my son. A wave of horror flowed through me. Your son? Stangmar nodded, though his face showed no joy. It is you who I have been seeking, for you are my son. Bum, bum, bum. But that, my friends, is the end of the chapter. I appreciate you all joining me tonight, and if you want to join me tomorrow, that would be awesome as well for the chapter 37. It's called Deeper Cut, and I will read it at 9 p.m. Pacific time. There we go. All right. Have a good night.